Hello, welcome to the webinar of Strategic Right-Sizing during and after the Corona crisis. I'm Ron Nussle, and this is module number 2 of the Corona webinar series for how to prepare now for the post-Corona economy. It's designed for CEOs, executives, and SME owners. So let's start out with a review of module 1. Last week, we talked about strategic right-sizing during and after the Corona crisis. And we began the webinar with a question. And I want to remind us again of this question. And this is a statement that I've heard from multiple executives and in multiple periodicals around the world, business periodicals and the mainstream media. I've heard, we will return to normal after the Corona crisis is over. I've also heard another variant of that, which is, I can't wait for the Corona crisis is over so we can return to normal. So the question is this statement true or false? And we asked it this last week, and this week, the answer is still false, because multi-pronged systemic shocks have occurred during the Corona crisis, which will lead us to the next new normal. After the 2008 crash, economists coined the term a new normal, and it will take months or years for these multi-pronged systemic reverberations to work their way through the global economy. Some of these reverberations will never subside, and they will develop into the next new normal. So we talked about last week in module 1, 6 reverberations from the world's most respected papers and 7 solutions. We talked about the first solution last week. This week, we're going to talk about 5 more. And in module number 3, which is scheduled for next week, we'll cover the last one. So the 6 reverberations of the Corona market correction, global trade relations realignment, the global oil war, global supply chain de-risking and nationalization, and virtual work is now center stage. And finally, the renewable sector has become high risk. So we're only going to cover the first one, and the Corona market correction. And as we're now all painfully aware, has been the most dramatic, the fastest, and the most severe since 1929. 38% in only 27 trading days. And so now people have talked about the Great Recession of 2008, and I've heard a number of people say we can no longer call it great because we've now exceeded that mark. So I won't cover the other 6 reverberations. As I said, module number 1 is available on the website. So we talked about strategic right-sizing solutions to implement now during the crisis to prepare you for what happens after the crisis. Last week we talked about strategic right-sizing. This week we're going to talk about running multiple scenarios, staying visible to your team, making changes during the crisis, virtual work, looking for new growth, and finally in module number 3 we're going to talk about de-risking the supply chain. So just for a review of number 1, stabilizing my financial liquidity through strategic right-sizing. This is the process that we're currently going through with a couple organizations around the world right now. So you first plot cash flow and gross margin for all projects and products on the strategic right-sizing matrix. Then you're going to calculate cash flow burn rate for 3 possible Corona recovery scenarios, a V and a U and an L. I'm going to go into detail on this in just a moment. And then based on the matrix, you're going to make a decision of number 1, 2, 3, or 4 and take specific actions. And finally, after doing this, go into the head office and do a core assessment of your core competencies and your SG&A functions. And we said, quadrant 1, strategic projects, these are critical to our core business. They're the foundation of the future, and we need to accelerate those projects in design. Quadrant 2, these are self-sufficient. They're not generating high returns, but they're generating positive cash, so they're not in bad shape. However, we'd like them to make more money, and so we want to monitor and incentivize the project manager or the general manager to move these into quadrant 1. We want to look for labor savings and supply chain savings. Quadrant 3, these are reality checks where you need to do a deep dive assessment during the Corona crisis to find out if these are projects that are really going to be big winners in the future, because today they're consuming cash. Strategic right-sizing is all about preserving cash. That's the number 1 issue right now, and we're going to talk about that in the next section when we get into the V, the U, and the L. How do we assess our cash based on the recovery, the most likely recovery scenarios? And finally, the leakers. The tough decisions are going to have to be made during this Corona crisis. And these are going to mean some projects or product lines are going to have to be shut down, and you're going to cancel the orders. redeploy the labor to other places, either into one of the other quadrants. So this, as I said, is a process that we're currently going through with a couple of organizations around the world right now. And we recommend that you take advantage of this learning. So let's talk about now on module 2, we're getting into running multiple scenarios. This is a common practice for risk assessment. You do multiple risk scenarios because you don't know what the exact outcome is going to be. Nobody can predict whether it's going to be a V recovery, a U recovery, or an L recovery. And so you have to do a cash burn rate calculation for all 3 possible recovery scenarios and identify what the requirements are for labor and for materials and for overhead and for facilities and capital expenditures and normal expense items like office supplies. And so doing some sort of a cash burn rate calculation at the macro level for each of these broad categories, labor, material, overhead, SG&A, and third-party outsourcing expenses. So let's talk about a V, a U, and an L. The reason we have to look at 3 different scenarios is because nobody, except for God, knows how long this crisis is going to last. Just a couple days ago, the president here in the United States announced that he's got a 3-phase recovery plan. But even that is not going to be equally distributed. Multiple states, there's 50 states here in the US, and some states are already starting to open the doors for business, and other states are saying, no, it's going to be months, because the level of the corona crisis is hitting every state differently. New York and California are getting hit far more severe than other states are. So based on the severity of the disease, the recovery will be delayed by that much time. So looking at 3 different scenarios, and this is in the 2008 crisis that occurred. And so first off, we looked at these different countries, and these are 7 different countries, starting with Turkey. Turkey had a V-shaped recovery. It went down in 1 quarter, but it took 3 quarters to pop back up. So even though it was a V-shaped recovery, the V was not equal. The V was shifted to 1 degree because it went down faster than it recovers back. And this is always the way a recovery is. So even though it took 27 trading days to get down, the economy will not recover in 27 days. A U-shaped recovery, which in the case of Poland, meant it goes down, stayed at a low level for 2 or 3 quarters, and then popped back up. And what we all hope is not the case, a L-shaped recovery, and it just happened in this case in 2008 to be Latvia, went down and then stayed flat at a very low depressed level. This is basically a depression as opposed to a recession, which is only 2 or 3 quarters long. So your cash burn rate for each of these scenarios needs to be run, and then based on which one happens, you'll be ready and you can take actions appropriately. You have to stay visible to your team because the situation is so dynamic. In fact, it's really hyper dynamic. The situation is changing not even daily, but hourly. So you have to over communicate. You know, never in my entire life have I seen the President of the United States and the Vice President stand before the American people every single day. And you need to be doing the same thing as an executive in your organization. And so you also need to be meeting with your team, but you can't lock yourselves into a corner and put together your strategic right sizing plan with your executives and not come out, because that will cause panic and the team that you have will be demoralized and not ready for the recovery when it comes. So you need to constantly communicate with your team, and you need to be staying in touch with your senior executives really hourly, a couple times a day. You should be checking in with your senior executives, and that's a best practice that one of the organizations we're working with right now is doing. They're actually having daily, twice a day check-ins of the senior executive team. The C-level team talks twice a day for an hour, once at 9 in the morning and once at 4 in the afternoon. So what are you going to be doing during the time of the crisis, getting ready for the recovery? That's the whole purpose of this webinar, is what are the actions that you take now to get ready for the recovery? There will be a recovery. We just don't know when it's going to be. We want to be ready. We want to use our time and our people. You still want to keep your core team in place, and you want to make sure that they're busy. They're not just sitting at home watching Netflix and getting paid. You want to keep them busy, but you can't do a 2-year ERP implementation or launch a brand new product line or build a brand new facility or go into a brand new market. But you want to plan for the recovery. And so a best practice that many organizations use is Agile or Scrum projects. And this came out of the software industry and it really was named after the rugby scrum concept, where a rugby team gets to, or the opposing team gets together and they kick the ball back and forth in the scrum, and then the ball comes out. And it's very fast and very rapid. When the ball comes out, that's when play really begins. So that's what we have in the scrum, is a 24-hour rapid cycle. And then we plan our scrum projects or agile projects over a 1 or 2 week period. So one of the organizations we're working with right now is doing this. So what are some of the things you can do during this 1 or 2 week period? Again, you can't do these huge projects, but you can make significant progress. First off, you could identify some of the projects or products that you're behind schedule on your design with. I started my career as a design engineer, and I can tell you we were always behind schedule. So this is a great opportunity to catch up on those quadrant 1 or quadrant 2 projects that we know are going to continue after the crisis is over. We know they're going to be part of the recovery. We'd like to use this time to take advantage to catch some of those projects up. So let's accelerate. Let's not put our design resources on quadrant 3 or quadrant 4 projects or products. Let's focus our design resources in quadrant 1 and quadrant 2 so we can accelerate those during the downturn. Another example of this is using our financial resources to look at your financials a different way. We talked about in the strategic right-sizing matrix, the gross margin versus cash flow. And many companies' financials are not set up this way. So this is a great time for your financial team to generate some of these new reports so you can be more focused on specific products, projects, or product lines. Most companies don't measure cash flow by products or projects. They aggregate their cash flow together. This is a great time to look at your cash flow by product, project, or product line. Another opportunity, another thing you could be doing that's very rapid is brainstorming new business development ideas or new markets. We're going to talk about that in the next 2 slides, is that there are going to be many opportunities coming out of this crisis. So during the crisis, we're all working virtually. This is unprecedented. Remote work has moved into a previously unheard of places, and it's become essentials now in schools and offices. And the picture, the upper left, is a courtroom. And who would have ever guessed that a courtroom would be done virtually? Well, this is a virtual courtroom. Federal, state, and local governments, which have been very resistant to virtual work in the past, have now embraced it. And here in Washington, D.C., pretty much everybody, all the organizations, all the main government, U.S. government agencies are working virtually. And the tools are not that smooth to use the first time. The first time you try to do some of these meetings, I typically tell people, you can plan on 15 to 30 minutes the first time you've ever had one of these webinars and these virtual meetings of lost time. That's just the way the technology is. It's going to take time. People are not used to it. But after doing this for a week or so, or 2 weeks, this will now become much smoother and you'll actually be starting your meetings on time and on schedule. Schools and any office functions are embracing this. Pretty much colleges have all shut down for the spring semester, in schools for the spring semester. And they're now talking about the fall semester. I read an article just yesterday on April 21st that was published in some of the major financial periodicals that 60% of the college registration staff are not sure what their fall semester is going to look like, whether they're going to be doing it virtually or online, or they're going to increase their number of virtual classes, and they're going to just do in-person classes at a lower degree. So 60% believe there's going to be more virtual classes and fewer in-person classes in the fall semester. So these are the kind of plans that they're putting together. I skipped food and beverage delivery because this is something that's personally been surprising to me. I've only ordered from Uber Eats, I think, 2 or 3 times in my life. But in the last 3 weeks in Washington, D.C., I think I've ordered from them about 30 times. So this industry is set to explode, and it has exploded. And now that people have moved through the resistance barrier of this, they're probably going to be doing more of it. So this is, again, another thing that will be part of the next new normal. There's going to be more local last mile delivery, not just of Amazon products, who of course is the world's most valuable company, but also of many other goods and services that have always been done in person. So what is the impact of this? The impact is the fixed variable cost ratio will be changed forever. What is that fixed variable cost ratio? If you look at all of your costs for your business, they break up into 2 categories, fixed costs and variable costs. Some people talk about a third category called semi-variable. We'll skip that for the time being. So fixed costs, property, plant, and equipment, licenses, infrastructure. These are the costs that pretty much stay the same quarter after quarter, month after month. The variable costs are direct labor, materials, outside services that you purchase. These vary throughout the economic cycle. What's going to happen now is that as a result of the resistance point that we've moved through as part of this crisis, there's going to be more variable resources and less fixed resources. I personally believe that this means that the commercial real estate industry is going to be in for a lot of surprises in the future, because a lot more people are going to be working remotely, and a lot of companies in some of these areas where they've already had excess capacity and underutilization of their fixed assets and their buildings, the rent occupancy rate is going to be probably even lower after the crisis. So some of the facilities won't need to be as big, and some of the facilities are not going to be as prevalent, and maybe not starting some new facilities because more people are going to be working remotely. Last mile delivery, we've already talked about this. This is another opportunity in the future that it's going to continue to grow. So now that we're talking about business development opportunities, let's just look at a few of them. These are all going to happen after the crisis. You know, the glass is half full and not half empty. After every financial crisis, there's always new business opportunities that come up. Infectious treatment facilities. Part of the reason for these lockdowns that have occurred, in fact, the biggest reason is because of hospital undercapacity. You know, I currently work in the medical construction field, and they measure construction of hospitals by the number of beds. Well, there's not enough beds in the world for this crisis. And so the reason for the lockdowns is because they're all worried about overwhelming the medical facilities. They won't have enough beds. So this is probably going to spur some additional infectious treatment facilities. Medical construction, you know, they've now had drive-through testing facilities. And so localized or micro medical facilities will probably see an expansion. We're talking about localization of critical supply chains. You know, everybody's been, and I've been part of this as a supply chain professional for the last 30 years, moving supply chains around the world. All of a sudden now, everyone's realizing the glass may not be half full, it may be half empty when it comes to having a global supply chain, because they have not done proper risk assessment. And some of these critical portions of the supply chain, pharma, food, energy, and defense. The last module 3 of this webinar series, we're going to spend our entire time talking about this topic, localization of critical supply chains after the corona crisis and planning for it now during the crisis. We're going to spend a whole segment next time on that. Mobile and virtual business support. As everybody knows, this has become an issue as many more people are working from home. Their facilities are not set up. They don't have their webcams. Webcams are sold out all over the United States. You can't buy a webcam now. They're gone. And so this has been a stock out because everyone's now working from home. And also business process outsourcing, or called BPO. BPO is the way that many companies leverage to increase their variable cost and lower their fixed costs. One of the companies that we work with is involved in business process outsourcing and call centers. I believe that this is an opportunity that they're going to see expanded growth, because many companies and many governments who have been resistant to outsourcing because they wanted everybody inside the building have now seen how work can be done with everybody outside the building through virtual work. Business process outsourcing will see an expanded role in the next new normal. So that's it for today. So we talked about in module 1, we talked about strategic right sizing, and 2 through 6, we talked about these other solutions. And in our next module 3, we're going to spend the entire time talking about de-risking your supply chain. Of course, a favorite topic for me, because our consulting practice started in supply chain management. And so we're going to give you some of our tools and tips for helping you de-risk your supply chain, identifying critical network nodes, and also localizing some of these critical commodities. So thanks a lot for joining us. We're going to have our next webinar next Tuesday and Wednesday, the 27th, 28th. And after this webinar, we'll be sending you an email with a link. We're going to publish this video on our website, and you'll be able to get access to it.